am so excited to have one of my closest friends here on the podcast. I mean, she really is the inspiration for so many of the projects that I do. Lise Silva, the one and only. How are you doing?
I'm doing good and I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I really wanted to have you on the show for many reasons, but you have so many amazing projects coming out. You're working on so many amazing things, and you have a book coming out. Am I right?
I do. It is very nerve-wracking slash exciting, but yeah, I have a book coming out November 3rd. Strangely is the release date. I did not pick that. Don't ask me, but it is coming out on election day. But you can pre-order at any time, but that's when the actual release date is.
Okay, so we are gonna get to that because I want to talk about that in detail. But let's start at the beginning. Where did you grow up? Where did you grow up? Tell me a little bit about your background.
My mother's side of the my mother and her side of the family are from Indiana, and my father is from Cape Verde Islands, which is an archipelago of islands off the west coast of Africa, kind of across from Senegal. And I grew up the first part of my childhood, like till about age 10 in Southern California, a bunch of little towns that are like between LA and San Diego. And then when I was 10, I moved to Indianapolis, and that was kind of to be closer to my mom's side of the family. And also just, I think, because it was more, it's obviously more affordable to be in Indiana, and my parents were just like kind of thinking about making that move. So I moved to Pike Township at age 10, and I lived there till 17 when I left to go to college. But that's kind of my upbringing. I always think of it as like half Southern SoCal and then half Indiana.
And I've spent some time in Southern California, as you know. And how was that? When you were 10 and you made the move from the West Coast to the Midwest? They're completely different in a lot of different ways. But how was that for you? How did you adjust?
It was so funny actually, because I was very much in my Southern California bubble in the sense that, well, I mean, I was a kid and that's all I really knew up until that time. I did go visit my grandparents in Indiana for like Christmases, but I kind of thought I didn't really know. You're that young, you're working out what is just your family and what is indicative of the place or the culture they're from, right? So I kind of thought most people in America lived in like an Adobe style house with a little Adobe roof. Like that's just what I thought. So coming to Indianapolis, like to see the houses look so different and the seasons, because we didn't have seasons where I grew up at first, like because it was just you kind of look to the mountains and you could see there'd be snow and you'd know like, okay, we're in winter, there's snow on these mountains. But Southern California is pretty much seasonally like kind of the same thing all year. So to have seasons was really cool and beautiful. Just to see the different houses like mesmerized me how they looked in Indianapolis. I kind of thought it looked like TV to me because like a lot of sitcoms, the exterior would be like, something similar to that. And then just showing up, I remember the teacher announcing, this is Lizzie from California. And everybody's like, ooh. So you kind of get a feeling of how people think of California. And Indiana at that time was so different than it is now. Indianapolis was, I think, always very cosmopolitan to me, at least the area of Pike Township in the time that I grew up in. But it was still not a lot of different ethnicities. It was kind of like more of a black or white type of place. It didn't have all the international culture that I was used to of like having friends at school and families we were living next to from the Philippines and from Korea and from Mexico, so that aspect wasn't there. And some of the things I remember the kids initially asking me were like, do you roller skate? I mean, obviously this is like 1991, but they were asking me all these questions like, are you vegetarian? Like I've heard about people just eat vegetables. Like you're from California, you must be, all these questions like that. So I was kind of piecing together what people thought of California just by,
Yeah,
arriving
the
to Vienna.
questions. The
Hmm.
questions. And what's really interesting, I just want to put this out there for all the listeners. We Lizzie and I sync books from time to time. We are Oprah's book club, but virtually. And we are currently reading Mariah Carey's autobiography, where I'm still on the very beginning part, but she is going in great detail about her upbringing, and all of the things that she went through in her life. And it's just brings me to a very introspective place, just about growing up and childhood, and just hearing you talk about it is just bringing me to stories of Mariah Carey talking about her childhood. So if anyone's out there, this is a plug for Mariah Carey's book. It's good. Get it on Audible.
It is good.
When you're at the gym, if you're doing anything, Mariah Carey's autobiography, The Emancipation of Mimi, The Real Mimi. I don't know if that's what it's called, but it's good. I really
The
enjoy it.
Mimi Mariah Carey. Yeah,
The
it is a
Meme,
really
that's what
good
it's
book.
called. Yeah.
Yes. And it was, yeah, that was an interesting time to grow up, and reading other people's accounts who are mixed and from other, and thinking about that in the context I grew up in. It is something that's important, I think, story to tell and to talk about and have dialogue about, because I don't think I think so much has changed in a lot of great ways. Not everything, but there are some positive changes that have happened. But yeah, sometimes I think back at that time and um, just reflect on what a unique experience it was. I think growing up at that time in Indiana, pre-internet, also it's very different now. And I don't go back to Indianapolis a ton. I enjoy going back when I can, but because my whole family dynamic has shifted, I don't really have close connections. I have like really good family friends and friends that are in Indianapolis, so I still feel in touch with it, but I don't get back as much as I want to. But when I do go back, I think about the changes that have occurred since I showed up there in 1991 or two, whatever that was, and till now. There is so much more access of information now, and um, there's a lot more movement happening in and out of the city, um, and it's just interesting to observe. And I do wonder the perspective of people who have grown up and lived in Indy the entire time, from birth till today, what
Yeah.
their perspective on that is, because I don't know if sometimes you see the changes because you've been through this slow evolution, versus when you leave, in like I did in the year 2000, and you come back every so often, you're seeing dramatic changes.
So let's kind of examine your time in Indianapolis as you were 17 and you're getting ready to leave. You have really had such an amazing career. You are an artist in so many different ways, from fiber art to actually painting. Um, how did your time in Indianapolis shape that part of your artistry? How did Indianapolis shape that for you?
I have to say, going to Pike High School, there was such a great creative arts department with resources and teachers. I think the art department was good. And you don't know it when you're in it, but when you compare to hearing other people's stories from other high schools around the country or whatever, what they had to work with, you really reflect. And I'm really grateful for the 90s Pike High School, art and music programs that really did help me to develop my style, my eye, and just I think just having the space and the freedom in those classes, that the teachers were very like laid back and kind of let us just explore, was really helpful. I met a lot of people who I'm still friends with to this day, who we share a lot of creative references, and we kind of grew up together in that sense too, just developing our creativity, our like work, our style. Yeah, I'm really grateful to have gone to a high school that had those programs, had like a jewelry making class, had like a, ceramics class. Like that is actually rare, I feel like. And it's even more rare today as they cut a lot of arts programs. So I
I
don't
can
know what the school is even like, what their offerings are today with compared with back then. Somebody else listening probably knows more about that than I do.
I agree with you. I went to Pike as well. We did not know each other while we were at Pike.
Crazy.
And
Did not.
I know it's so crazy, but I had always really loved theater, but then just going into at Pike and really going into the theater program. And I was in theater as a freshman all the way through my senior year. And it really was a time, there was a lot of freedom, artistic freedom, a lot of artistic license to be taken, and I don't know, and it was pre-internet. There were so many amazing things that the internet has brought to us, but there's something really cool about the not having as much technology and actually having to search for information, like going to a library or talking to a teacher, or all of those things that I think could be lost in translation these days. Talk to me about, you transitioned out of Pike, and what were your next steps after that?
I went to college. I went to IU. I went to another smaller college and then transferred back to IU. And I'm really glad I did, because there was a lot of resources there that I really liked. Just as a university, I feel like, again, I was very blessed to have that be an in-state choice for me, because a lot of more prestigious schools didn't have the resources. I came to find out later that IU had, but I went to college and I thought I was going to be more practical and study sociology, and I continued that on into grad school. And I had several different career changes before I came back to what I do now, which is fiber based, but it's also bringing in some of my background with being trained more in painting and drawing. So I do a lot of digital paintings now, and graphic art now. I do um, some work that envelops my sociology background, where I've written this booklet called Craft and Practice that discusses kind of the, I guess I would say, the overlap between uh, social issues, power dynamics, capitalism, and its effects in our culture with the creative community. So
Mhm.
kind of goes into talking about cultural appropriation and how to have a community grounded practice and really contribute to creating a more equitable creative community in your local area, but just in general, part of being a responsible kind of a responsible creative person, whether that's an artist or a maker who um, really anchors their practice in authenticity, in a community grounded environment, so that it's respectful of other artists, it's inclusive, but it's still maintaining your own unique creativity. So I feel like I've kind of doubled back and incorporated a lot of bits and pieces from my background that I studied along the way to get to textiles. And it's been really cool to just develop these different aspects of my art practice now. So I have different modes that I can switch in and out of. I can do digital painting, and I can offer art prints. I can do installations. I do teaching. I teach knots and knotting, and the knotting techniques I use for my jewelry and wall hangings. And I also write on creative community issues.
Now, I want to talk about that because I think, for anyone that's pursuing the career path of art, being an artist in whatever way that manifests itself, how is one able to wear so many different hats? We talked about your background in sociology and then how that led you You were able to use that background and incorporate that into your life now. But how does someone who's listening understand that that is A, possible, and B, as we know, necessary?
I feel like the pandemic has shown me a lot about how necessary it is to have different modes, different facets of your work. Because if your work is all based in in-person events, or your work is all based in online transactions, or whatever that is, we can see now how one thing could happen where that could crumble that entire infrastructure that your work was based off of. So it's really important not to have all of your eggs in one basket, in my mind, just for your own safety and protection, but also for your own how would I put it, like maybe your own for lack of a better word, like mental health, because I feel like it's really good to switch between different things that exercise different aspects of who you are as a person. So
Mm,
if you have developed a certain skill set, teaching can really work your brain in different ways, that if you're just doing something, and anyone has this experience of like being, even semi-expert at something, and then trying to teach someone else to do it, it can actually be really shocking how challenging that is to communicate and to teach. And so I feel like that exercise of passing down wisdom and communicating our work in different ways is really good for us, as it is for just the community in general, to share skills. um, In-person stuff can be an amazing way to like stay in touch with people locally and build relationships. But obviously we're seeing it, if that side of things collapses due to um, something, any kind of health thing, or anything that could affect in-person events, then it's also good to have something digital you can offer, or some kind of product that you can sell online, just to have that aspect that financially supports you, and also gives you breaks from these other modes that can be like really heavy to take on. So some days when I go in my studio and I'm like shipping art prints or something, I'm really enjoying that time of just like listening to my podcast, going through the motions, packing these things. Like there's something really lovely about that. However, if I was to do that every single day in and out, I would probably really get tired of that. And
yeah.
so I really enjoy just switching modes throughout the week to put on these different hats.
It sounds like you're kind of as everything can relate to Beyonce. It's like, you're Beyonce when you're Beyonce, and then you're Beyonce when you're in Destiny's Child, and then you're Beyonce when you're with Jay-Z. It's like you're Beyonce when you're the Lion King. She has all of these different modes, but
Tasha Fierce, baby, don't forget.
but no, on a more serious note, that's 100. I think that's true. And even with the work I'm doing with my podcast, I had to make a lot of different transitions and tweaks and adjustments. And, that was pre-COVID, that's post-COVID, that's right now during COVID. And I think that's something also, being an entrepreneur, you learn along the way, because most successful artists are usually entrepreneurs, because you understand you have to wear all the hats. One of your signature brands, one of your most signature things that you do is called Sacred Knots. Talk to me a little bit about Sacred Knots. I love that name. I was a fan of it when I first heard it. How did you come up with that name, Sacred Knots?
Yeah, I really kind of started to grow, I guess, my community online and my work through working with Sacred Knots and developing this concept. And it was really just because I can't stress this enough to anyone who wants to be, or is, and wants to develop as a maker, as an artist, following your passion and not looking at it as a commercial enterprise in any kind of way, at least in the beginning of starting an art practice. So when I started knotting, and what I later called Sacred Knots, I was really just following my intuition, my interest to study something that I found intriguing and beautiful, and really started to unlock that there's all of these practices around the world, some of which are lost today, some of which are thriving. For example, in China and Korea and Japan, there's still like a really thriving knotting practice. But there were knotting practices around the world on all inhabited continents and many different countries, some of which are lost to time. But a lot of cultures developed knotting as a way to communicate ideas, to communicate spiritual concepts. And knotting is something that existed pre-literacy. In other words, you can use rope or cord to create designs that mimic things in reality, nature, or just like with drawing, how you're creating a representation, right? Knots can be used to create a visual representation. And that was really important pre-literacy in societies, to have things like knots that were actually, as basic as they sound today, a technology. And I really got into thinking about knots as something that is such an everyday thing that no one thinks is important, that really started as a very important practice in a lot of cultures around the world, and in
Mm,
different ways. There's so many unique things you can do with knotting, ways cultures looked at knotting and the way they incorporated it into accounting systems. Even, again, this is pre-literacy, but if you placed a knot on different parts of a cord, it could symbolize, well, this is kind of maybe a little complicated to just explain and not show visually, but if you have a lot of different strings hanging and you almost think of it like a grid, at certain points in the string, if you make a knot, it could represent something happened, right? So if you were to show, in our village, there were a lot of births this year, there were a lot of deaths this year, or if you want to use knots almost like an abacus system for accounting, you can make these elaborate wall hangings that the knots represent, basically mathematical concepts. And that was very common in particularly South America, also in different parts of Asia, to use knots in that way. So basically, sacred knots just kind of came about like looking at something every day that seems very benign and mundane as something that could be sacred, or was sacred, or is sacred, and really thinking about making knots as a grounding kind of meditative practice.
I love that. I always I watch, some films, and there's a some films that use older, maybe war films. They use like Morse code, and I've always found Morse code to be so interesting because it's a type of communication that people don't necessarily use anymore, but some people still do, and it's really a way to communicate when language, verbal language, is not accessible. I love that. I think that's brilliant. So Sacred Knots came about in that particular way. It came about out of a genuine interest, and also out of you really wanting to dive deeper into a practice that is sacred to many people. How then did you begin to develop your own style after looking at all these other amazing people and their cultures and their civilizations using it? How did you integrate that into your own style?
Yeah, well, I feel like my natural tendency is always to go off script. I never enjoy like following some traditional practice to the T. So I, in the beginning, I did try to learn just what is knotting, making traditional knots out of books, making especially sailor's knots. That's probably the most influential knotting practice for me personally, was sailor's knots. And I kind of just phased that into, what if I wanted to make it more ornate and like sew gemstones into it? What if I added tassels? What if I played with dyeing to change the color of the cord and wrapping? And I started just to incorporate all of these fiber techniques that I grew up kind of playing with, just because, as someone like growing up creative with like not a lot of resources, but my mom always did have like a sewing machine and needles, and I would play with sewing and like, in little ways dabble in these sewing techniques. So I kind of started to infuse the knots with all of these jewelry making and also sewing techniques, and eventually designing my own knots, just using the principles that I picked up on from knots, right? So once you do enough traditional knots, you kind of see like, oh, okay, this is the kind of thing that has to happen to hold the knot together, to give it structure, to make a design look visually interesting. And you can kind of experiment and play with cord, and especially, if it's the right kind of cord. Not every cord will produce the same results, because there is like a lot of, for lack of a better word, I guess, science that goes into it. The cord has to have the right structures for what you're doing, or it's not going to look, it might look just more like a tangle rather than a visually interesting knot. But playing with materials, playing with techniques, is how I started to kind of develop my own style.
And where are you currently based? I think that we kind of let that out. We talked about that, or your Indianapolis and then going to
Yes.
university. Where are you based right now?
I am in Oakland in the Bay Area, California.
Oh, yeah, I love Oakland. I
I
one of
know
my
you
favorite places.
do.
Yeah, one of my favorite places. Now, talk to us. The name Sacred Knot invokes something that sounds extremely spiritual. Do you have spiritual practices that you go through, especially during this time that everyone is undertaking with the COVID pandemic and the election that's happening, and just all of the very uncanny things? That's the only way I can describe 2020. All of the uncanny things that are happening. Do you have any spiritual practices that keep you grounded during this time? Is nodding one?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's important for people to consider incorporating tactile, very, possibly ancestral kind of physical, crafts into their daily life, because I think more and more people are seeing that their screen time is increasing during the pandemic. We are looking for connection that we can't necessarily have in person with our friends and family and different people. So we're finding ourselves on social media more, or just checking the news more, which is also very upsetting and depressing a lot of the time. So um, I think one of the best things that we can all do for our mental health is finding some kind of craft, something non-screen based, non-technology based that we can do where we can just kind of let go. And I think it's also important to state it's not relaxing or meditative if you start to learn a craft and you're very focused on having a certain outcome, or a end result, or a product, or selling it even. Sometimes we just have to work with the materials, really get into it, just really feel what it feels like to be doing these um, very tactile practices that our ancestors may have done, whether it's like woodworking or knotting or painting or drawing or whatever. But interacting with materials and letting go of what the outcome may be, and really embracing just the moment of relaxation, connecting with our creativity, really looking at the colors we're working with or the textures we're working with and thinking like, what do I like? Do I like this combination? How does this feel? How does what memories are coming up for me? What ideas or thoughts can I incorporate into this piece?
But
And
why is that so important?
um I think it's it's hard to say why, because it's intrinsically valuable to me. It's something that instantly relaxes people, and I see this happen all the time when I would teach in-person workshops. A lot of people were very tense and hard on themselves when they came to a workshop and they had never done anything like this before, yet they insisted that they had to walk out of class with a certain end result, right? And usually it was an end result that was way beyond a beginner's normal, ability. Crafts take time, and the stress of screens and of our jobs and of capitalism and of the feeling that we have to produce an end result is very much the antithesis of our human nature in a way. I feel like we're not meant to be robots and be turning out products that are perfectly polished. We need time to just rest and just allow thoughts and feelings to arise, and kind of get in touch with our own creativity and our own breath and slow down time. I think
Mm.
that's a really important aspect of meditation and of just general relaxation, is embracing these activities that don't put any expectations on you, and just allow you to just be, and allow you to be mental in a mental zone where time slows down, and you're not on the clock, and you're not forced
Mm.
to do something.
Incredible. I think there's a saying that people sort of overuse, but it's actually really true. It's not about it's not about where you land, but it's about the journey of getting there. And there's a lot of you hear that and you're like, okay, shut up, millionaire. But there's so much truth to that, because you can only get to where you would like to go by being present in the moment, in the present moment. And if you're in a class, for example, trying a nodding technique, and it's not getting you to, you're not where you want to be at this super sophisticated level, acknowledging that, understanding that, sitting with that, and then working from that space of it's a process, and I'm going to appreciate this moment tomorrow when I'm working on it again, and then the day after when I'm working on it again. But I'm not putting the stress on myself to say I've got to be. It comes, it's osmosis, it flows. I love that. I just think that's so brilliant. We kind of touched on this a little bit, and I really want to kind of just go back. What has 2020 taught you so far?
That is really hard. I think the lessons are still in progress, and I feel like, or in process, and I feel like we'll all have a lot more to say, like really valuable insights in retrospect once we get a little further. Hopefully things pan out like in a positive direction. That's part of the I feel like that's part of why it's so hard to be really insightful, I guess, for lack of a better word right now,
Yeah,
is just
like you're
because,
specific about what it is to, yeah, like stick a pin in it. Yeah.
yeah, because I feel like there's so much uncertainty and we're still working through it. But I feel strongly so far that there's a lot of things that have been positive, as much as there is difficulty. Um, and one thing that I think a lot of artists and creative people have enjoyed about it, not everyone, but a lot of people, is there's not this kind of like constant FOMO of like, I feel like pre-pandemic, we were at such a breakneck speed with things happening constantly, and our phones constantly alerting us of these events happening. And it's easy to get caught up in the feeling that you're never at the right place at the right time, right? You're missing something. If you're at home, like working on your craft or something, you're missing a party or an event. Or if you're at a party event, you're not working on your work. It's like
Yeah.
never be enough, and that's part of my point when I was talking about like really connecting with something spiritual within you, is essentially about releasing yourself from obligations and a sense of time and quote unquote productivity, slowing down time. And I feel like a positive thing that has come from the pandemic is that sense of slowing down time to the point where we have a potential for more time to quietly work on our craft, and work on things and think through things and process things. And maybe that's not accessible for everyone, because we're all working with different abilities and resources and different issues and different situations. But that's a potential that is positive that we can hopefully tap into, is just being alone with our work and having some quiet to just hone our craft and just write in our journal or work on that thing, that project that we had been putting off for a long time, or
Mm-hmm.
taking a class online, you know, taking an online class in something we've always wanted to learn just for fun. Um, that is something really rewarding and like kind of in a weird, amazing potential opportunity here for us. But again, you know, it's tough to say that because we're all working with different things and there's so many different situations that not everyone's able to do that. And I think that even if you don't have the resources to carve out a lot of time to work on something for yourself or to relax even, just a few minutes, whatever you can grab to just find something that gives you a sense of peace and relaxation. And sometimes people have a difficult time sitting and meditating, you know, a lot of people do. Um, and I feel like it's very helpful to let people know you can still access that meditative space through something where you're working on a craft or you're working on an art piece or you're, you know, like I brought up woodworking or just something random that is always interest you. Like this is a good time to take that up and work on it when you can, just, you know, throughout the week or throughout the month when you can grab some time and just kind of let yourself be and not worry about an end result.
I've found for me, there's been a lot of things I've been learning through this year. But for myself, it this pandemic has really, almost like shown me like who the man behind the Wizard of Oz is. It's pulled back the rug out from under capitalism and really just kind of made a farce of our system of constantly working, constantly being, constantly having to produce something to show your worth when most of, not everyone, but most of the people who are in, the higher tax bracket would never dream to work the way that some other people in different tax brackets work. So for me, that's a lesson that I'm sure will continue to replay itself throughout my life and everyone's life. But if this did nothing else, this pandemic is really showing, I think, even artists even more so, because we can kind of see all the colors, we use all the colors, that you that gratitude is the attitude, but B, nothing is ever really what it seems. So always just try to go a little bit deeper and figure out what is everything mean for you as an individual. Now, one thing I do know is that you have created some amazing art during this pandemic. Incredible stuff. Talk to me about comfort food.
Yeah, comfort food is a booklet I made that I just released on in a PDF form, but it was something I started early in the pandemic when I was learning uh, how to paint digitally. Like I'd been working on that since kind of the end of 2019, trying to carve time to do that. And it's funny because it's the advice that I had just been giving out, like, you know, take the time to learn something. But what's funny is that um, for me, it wasn't a tactile craft, right? It was something on a screen and digital. But that's what's funny is like we all need different medicine. We all need different reprieve from our work. So my work was more in person. It really was more about sorry, not in person. What am I trying to say? More tactile, more working with materials. And so I kind of longed for something I could just kind of space out and just sit and draw on a screen without having to worry about getting materials. Because, you know, as a lot of people who work with materials and makers that create products saw during the pandemic, a lot of our sources for supplies were getting shut down, you know, obviously like getting supplies was hard in the beginning. So when that all happened, I was I was learning to paint digitally, and I was also thinking about how everyone was kind of turning to comfort food. There was this really um, really strong collective uncertainty. I mean, there still is an uncertainty, but I feel like it was especially strong in the early part of the pandemic when everyone's really freaking out, like, what even is this disease? Like, what's happening?
Yeah, no toilet paper, no, not. I mean, I
Exactly.
had never seen. We had to stores were giving the first hour of being open, to senior citizens, which I thought was incredible. But that type of uncertainty I've never seen before.
Exactly. There was so much panic happening, and people were turning to food for a sense of just grounding and relief and relaxation, and also of interest. So people were learning how to bake bread and doing all of these things. And I just started thinking about this concept of comfort food and just how beautiful food is, and how it is like an art, and how much it relaxes us. And it's also something ancestrally. A lot of the dishes that we have during the holidays are things that are, if not the same, but are um, different, kind of like the evolution of the ingredients our ancestors used at earlier times, to comfort and to restore themselves through hardship, through famine, through all of these things, through trauma. And so I made this booklet where I compiled all these recipes that I had got from friends of mine who are creative and artists and herbalists. And I also incorporated these paintings on food. And it was just a really fun project to do. And I needed the project as much as I wanted to share it for other people.
I love, I love it. Now you didn't ask me for a recipe, but you've also never had my cooking, so it's totally fine.
I feel like I have had your cooking though. Like, I'm trying to think back. I feel
I
like
don't think so.
maybe not. I think possibly like a breakfast or something. I feel like I've
Yeah, yeah, maybe. An avocado. I probably sliced an avocado for you.
so
Maybe.
funny. Yeah.
So, talk to me about your upcoming book because I have seen the process kind of from the beginning, and now it's coming to fruition to an actual physical copy. I want to talk about the inspiration behind the book and the process for someone who's never written a book before. What does that take? First of all, did you ever think that you would write a book?
I've always wanted to write a book. Yeah, I really, especially I feel like as a kid, books were even more um, of a milestone, like a symbol of something, something really important, like a real transition moment for somebody in their career, or just a really important thing for a culture or a community to have something in book form. So that was always a dream of mine, but it's kind of like one of those dreams that I didn't know how it would happen. I kind of had let go of it. I didn't really think it would happen. It wasn't consciously at the forefront of my mind. As I got older, it was kind of that back burner dream that kind of just existed in my mind. And working on a book has definitely been the most challenging thing I have ever done. It's so uh, just on every level. It's challenging emotionally. It's challenging mentally. You're working with, deadlines and various other constraints. So it's not like just writing for yourself. It is when you're working with a company, a publisher. There's a lot of other things on the table that you have to speak to and incorporate. So it was tough on many levels, and I feel very accomplished that I really did it. And it didn't feel really real until I got the physical copy, which I do have copies here.
It's the
Did you
first
get your
look,
copy?
guys. Oh, it's beautiful. Well, I have mine pre-ordered.
Oh yeah, because
But
it's coming November 3rd. Yes, yes, yes.
mine's
Okay.
coming. That is a beautiful. Can we see that cover one more time? That's
Yeah.
beautiful. Now, for those who are listening, it's a really beautiful. It's a kind of a white background with almost an auburn orange situation, and some of her amazing knot works on the cover, knot necklaces, which I love.
Yes, it is called Sacred Knots, Create, Adorn, and Transform Through the Art of Knotting. And Yeah, putting it in book form, it took a lot for me to get to the place where I was ready to kind of release my technique. Because even though to make my work, I have drawn on some traditional techniques, I really innovated them and combined different techniques in my own way and found my own aesthetic. So the book came at the right time when I was ready to move on in a sense and step into more of a role of teaching my style rather than just doing my style to as a maker, you know. Um, so yeah, it's interesting how it came about. Okay, it was kind of like this really foundational, like kind of very old, not old in a negative sense at all, but like old in like a very, again, yeah, foundational dream had come up for me just at the right time. The opportunity presented itself and I took it. So I am still floored and excited to like actually have that in fruition.
Now, what can we expect when we open those crisp pages? What can I expect and all of my listeners expect? What can we expect when we read this book?
Um, I think I really wrote the book to speak to um things that had not been as many things as I could speak to that had not been previously addressed within the collection of not books that are already out there. So I think it's important to note that because there are other books that offer more knots that you can go through and try out. And there are other knot books that have other aspects of knotting. I was very adamant. I didn't really want to repeat what's out there. I didn't want to step on the toes of other authors who had already written books. And my book is very, how would I say this? I guess it's something that I feel like is a journey that I really hope people take the time to read through from start to finish and really embrace my perspective on knotting rather than just focusing on just pulling the techniques, because there really are other better books to just pull techniques from. If that's what you want, you just want an encyclopedia of knots or something, those books do exist out there and I didn't want to rewrite them, you know. I really wanted to imbue this book with my sense of the meditative ancestral aspect of knotting and how to bring that into your practice. And the book covers some things that are very me and very like key to my aesthetic, like color and like some of the other fiber techniques that I mix in with the knotting. So yeah, I hope the book feels like very unique to people and they really sink in and like allow time to slow down and really read the book as it's kind of laid out in this story and this quilt of like different little mm, I guess like some of my insights, historical bits, tips, and it kind of weaves in like several different aspects, meditation, techniques, and it's yeah, it's its own thing, and I hope people enjoy it and like see it for what it is, being a different type of notebook.
It comes out on November the 3rd. Where can we pick it up? I'm gonna have a link, FYI, on my site. But where can people pick it up?
People can pick it up. Hopefully pretty much anywhere that sells books. I hope that people find it really easy to find in person or online. Online, I know Barnes and Noble, Amazon, some of the big companies that, you know, I honestly don't necessarily advise people go through a bigger seller, but, you know, because the pandemic has shown us that our community bookstores really need support, I do encourage people to try to find it on a community, you know, local basis first. If people want to get it through me, especially through pre-order, I will be offering other stuff in with the book as like a little fun package. So it's also available on my website, lizziesilva.com. But
You want to spell Lizzie?
Yes, I will spell Lizzie because it's Lise. And the reason for that is it's a Portuguese spelling. I really started my practice when I lived in Brazil. And in Brazil, in traditional Portuguese, the letter Z doesn't exist. And it's, this is kind of funny, but Liz in Portuguese is pronounced lixo, which is very similar to the word for trash in Portuguese, which is lixo. And I hated the pronunciation leash. And I also don't want my name to be that close to trash. So I spelled my name the Portuguese way, Lise, so people would say Lizzie and pronounce it correctly that way. So it's funny in languages. Sometimes you have to either choose, like, do you want to change your spelling to get people to pronounce it correctly? Or are you going to spell your name correctly and then have people pronounce it different? So it's
And
like,
constantly have to correct people. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so I chose pronunciation over spelling. But yeah, so it's LiseSilva.com is my site.
I love it. I want to explore a few more conversations with you because throughout this, and also I didn't get a special package, so I'm gonna have to order a second book from you directly because I want a special Lizzie Silva package. I want it signed.
You don't have to even order it. I will.
No,
Yes.
no, boo, I got you. I'm gonna order it. But I
Okay.
wanted to, throughout our conversation today and throughout our conversation in life, something I see that always that comes up, it's a perpetual kind of topic, is the idea of non-attachment. And even your and letting go, I should say, non-attachment and letting go. Even how the book came out, you know, it's something that you had and it's something that you had dreamed about, but it was something that you had let go of and then it came to you. How does that happen? How can we all do that? How can we all come into spaces in our lives, especially now, where we can really get in touch with not being attached to the outcome and get in touch with letting go and existing in the now? How can we do that?
That is a really difficult question. I feel like what gives people more confidence to do that is trying it and seeing it happen where maybe I don't know, it's really difficult because usually I feel like people would gravitate towards things that they can really tangibly witness brings results, right? And that is part of it's part of, I would say, probably human nature, but it's also part of something which is potentially detrimental to us. There's just good and bad with that trait, that characteristic, I think. Um, and I feel like the best way you can get more confident with that in like the big things of life is trying it on the small level, something that's like less risk, right? So, with something like your career being like, well, I want to do this thing, so I'm just going to quit my job right now and I'm just going to start, that may not be the best time to try it because that's a high risk, situation. But trying letting go in a really small way, and that's where I feel like art and creativity comes in. And that's why I feel like why a lot of artists are very free people. They feel free and they make unconventional choices because they do this regularly within their art and they see that it does bring them to a place that is important, even if they might experience some negative effects of it. Like eventually it can bring you to a different place on your journey where you reflect and you think, oh, okay. Even though I looked at that as like not being successful, it actually did bring me insights that brought me here, right? So I know this sounds really abstract, but to bring a better example, if in art and creativity, materials are expensive. So every time you're, let's say, painting, for example, paints are expensive, a canvas or the nice quality paper is expensive. And so if you take a risk with your creative practice where you're like, okay, today I'm going to do something completely different. I'm going to try this new technique, or I'm just going to like not necessarily go off of anything. I'm just going to kind of like just start in and see where it takes me. You may end up with something that doesn't look like a quote unquote sellable end result, right? But it may be something that you kind of put aside, and later you realize that there's like a really interesting color combination thing happening there that you can use for your next piece. Or you may come through a realization by making a mistake with the paint, and it creates this new effect that you're like, oh God, I've never seen this before. I've never done this. I really want to like play with this some more on another piece. So sometimes mistakes and things that aren't kind of like polished end results bring us a lot of awareness. And so just trying it on a small level of kind of letting go with a creative practice gives you more um, confidence in your intuition. And I kind of feel like that's what this is about, is like feeling confident and feeling grounded that your intuition is leading you in the right direction, even though you may go through this like kind of like winding journey to get somewhere. It all is worth it. It all is valuable to you in your experience.
I agree. Who are some artists, what, and whatever medium, that inspire you? And you
God,
can feel free to say me, but you don't have to.
absolutely. Okay, Kendall Antron, number one on
No.
the list. No, you really do inspire me. You do what we were just talking about, actually, which is
I'm
like,
cutting this out. Now I don't need this inspiration.
I'm not serious though. I'm really serious. You have really, you're a talented person. You've done different things and different facets and unexpected things that I don't think you would have seen yourself doing this podcast. If somebody told you 10 years ago, like you'd have like, first of all, what is a podcast? That's first off.
Yeah.
But,
And who are you? How did you get in my house? Right.
but I feel like you're very game to like take a leap and to try something new. And that is what makes you a creative person, is like not being scared to experiment and to try things. And those are usually the kind of artists that I like really love, are people that do something that's really unconventional and they really value their intuition. And God, it's really hard to think of like, well, who are the artists like I love off the top of my head. I mean, Faith Ringgold is somebody who I really love, who again is textile fiber artist who really merges social community activism ancestry in with her work visually, and an amazing artist who really stayed true to like her style and what she loved, even when it wasn't being embraced by the mainstream. And she kept going with it, and she kept um, investing in herself and in her dreams and manifesting these visions. And now she's finally seen as an iconic, artist.
Hmm.
But there was a time, it's hard to believe, that I was reading an article about her and how she even offered to just make something for the Black Panther Party in the early 70s. And they were like, no, no, thank you. Like, it's just crazy that anyone would today to think about her, like anyone would turn down her offering to make a piece for you or your cause or anything. But people really didn't see it. They didn't get it. And I feel like that's common. You really have to just continue to believe in your intuition again, and just keep following the path and doing what brings you joy, and trusting and having, I guess that's where trust and faith comes in, that it's not for nothing. It's for something, the development of you and your vision, or doesn't always mean monetary success or fame or anything like that, but it can bring about amazing things for you as a person, just the evolution of your spirit over your life. So she's one that I really love. I love Henry Darger, who's like a very what most people would call like an outsider artist, in that he made all of these crazy drawings in his apartment that nobody even discovered till I think he had already died when all of these things were found. He was a janitor, I think, by day, and really worked on his art just alone. And it wasn't for an audience or wasn't for anything commercial. It was like his own vision. And it was all the pieces kind of fit together into this world that he envisioned. So that's inspiring to me. Yeah, just so many artists along the lines. But I think you get the picture of kind of like what I'm saying. It's almost not even as much about the aesthetic or this development of skill as it is someone just really diving into their own intuition and their own vision and really taking the time without the expectation of fame or success or whatever, just taking the time to see this thing out and just manifest it. And it's kind of like when you ask like, but why? It's like, I don't know why, you know, because
Yeah.
people just have to see it out and nobody knows why they have to do it. They just know that they're compelled to chase this dream or to manifest this vision.
You know, I think that's I feel the same way about like some musical artists. There's some people that I love that do that, and they may not necessarily be the most popular, but they are the people who dive into and create their own world. You know, I can remember watching the Missy Elliott video "Super Duper Fly" when I was like 10. And I'm like, who's this lady rolling down a hill? And she's in a big trash bag, you know, costume. And it was incredible. Grace Jones is another one. Khalees is another one. These individuals who go through life and they are in the moment and they create their own aesthetic and they are committed to creating their own aesthetic. That's something that's super important as well, is like the commitment to your own intuition that leads to your aesthetic. I love that so much.
Yeah.
What are you, when you think of Indianapolis, what's a word that comes to mind?
Oh, that's tough. I don't know if a word comes to mind. I mean, I could say something super generic like Hoosier. Like, I don't know. I'm just trying to think like,
Long's Bakery, right?
right. Well, that's a good one. Um, I don't know if I would say a word comes to mind. I would just say like kind of just this whole pastiche of like different memories that I have of growing up and just I was thinking today about just all the places that I loved in Indianapolis, which a lot of them don't even exist anymore or are in completely different forms than they were back in the 90s or whatever. And that does make me a little sad. I feel like a lot of places in America are like this, where somewhere that's really special to a community or just like an amazing place that should be like an iconic legendary place, at some point developers take over and they like take the space, you know, and it gets taken out and it's gone and you're just kind of left with that memory of like what the city used to be or what that place used to be. I mean, I guess some of that is inevitable, but some of the spaces, it just feels like those should have been preserved as like cultural spaces or public spaces.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess that's what comes up when I think of Indianapolis, just different memories I have of different spaces and landmarks that really evoke the city to me.
When you visit Indianapolis, is there a place that you have to go, a restaurant or a landmark? Is there a place that you just love to visit when you come back to Indianapolis?
I would say I like to drive around to different spots that and just see like again like there's no guarantee that some of these places that I used to go to will be there the next time. And especially what's really devastating is like with the pandemic how much is changing, of like how many local businesses are closing. But I would say every time I went back to Indianapolis I would like to drive around. I would always love to go downtown, like because as a kid like going to the circle was always like really cool special experience for a little kid, you know. And what used to be big obviously back in the day especially was the mall scene. Like going to the malls were always fun, and so there's something nostalgic about that. And Butler, like the Rose Garden and spots like that, they're just so beautiful. um that's definitely a favorite. um Broad Ripple, thinking about like especially it's so that's so different from what it used to be, but I always just like to at least drive around and go to these places and take a look and just kind of like, you know, peek around, see what's changed and what's still there, and just like memories definitely come back.
I love that. Will you ever return to us, Lizzie? Would you ever come back
I
to Indiana?
I would love to. I think that it's just like tough when you live. It's tough because my mom, who lives in Indiana, now lives 2.5 hours from Indianapolis, and so many people I know, there's just circumstances have changed since they lived in Indianapolis, or since we all lived in Indianapolis. So it's just tough to find a I feel like we just all get caught up in our lives sometimes, where like some of these places that are very like nostalgic or um essential to our upbringing, we don't go back to as much as we'd like to. It's just
Mm,
travel is so expensive, and then we're just getting caught up in the rat race. It's like you don't get out and go see things, as much. But um I would love to go, like when the pandemic's over, like go back. I think especially like the fall in Indianapolis is just a super nostalgic, beautiful time.
beautiful. I mean, I'm not rubbing it in your face, but it's literally
It's
beautiful.
beautiful.
The
And
colors and I was flying back from DC, and I mean, the aerial view of the colors, it's like, not to really get super, spiritual, but I'm like, if y'all don't believe in God, just look at this. It's just a beautiful
so beautiful.
colors. Like, yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah.
And going down to like McCormick's Creek and places like that, like Southern Indiana, oh my God, just going to some of those big parks are just so gorgeous with the hills and in fall. And I don't know, fall is such a nostalgic time with like back to school. And I don't know, it just really, I do miss like, I do miss the seasons. That is something very influential that Indianapolis like put in my heart. Like, from having grown up without really seasons in California and then experiencing them there, I still haven't gotten over that. Like, it really is an amazing time marker, because I feel like in California, you really lose sense of time. What is time? And the seasons are so grounding when I go back to Indianapolis, just to experience like the transitions and to see the visual changes really gives me like um a really a much better sense of time passing, and also more memories come back to me that I feel like
Mhm.
don't come up for me when I living in California, just because um I think it's because being in pretty much the same climate all the time, you're just accustomed to that mode. Whereas when the climate is kind of shifting, you're like being put back into different mindsets. And I do love the snow, and I love thinking about, and I know with climate change, things are different in Indianapolis. Like some of the last times I've been in the winter was not what I remember as a kid, like with, you know,
Vaseline on your face. That was definitely what I had growing up.
yeah,
When it
and 2 to 4 feet, like opening the door, remembering that like around Christmas time, and the like having 2 to 4 feet of snow like outside your door. Like, I don't even feel like it snows like that as much in Indianapolis anymore, does it?
Yeah, this past winter was mild, but the winter before was
Mhm.
frigid. So, it kind of goes back and forth. And I do think that it's going to be a really real winter, because it's been really, really cold here as of late, and we're not even in November yet. So I think it kind of, like you said, it's kind of unpredictable with global warming.
It is, yeah. And we're going into like, as we're talking now, it's about to be Halloween, and I feel like remembering as a kid how cold it would be, and like wearing your costume out, and like what you'd wear like based on the weather. And yeah, it brings up a lot of memories for me just thinking about that.
I love that. Before I let you go, your book is a major accomplishment. Is there anything else that you're super excited about, for the rest of the year? Is there something else that you're looking forward to?
For the rest of the year, I feel like it is this latter part of the year is more about like the book coming out, and some things surrounding the book, which is some e-courses that I'm going to drop, because having the book some people find it easy to learn based on text and diagrams, but a lot of people do not. And I don't feel like I prefer text or diagram. Well, actually, I do really like diagrams, but it's maybe not my optimum learning mode either. So I really wanted to have the information in e-course form so that it's an actual video people can watch and people can learn by video. So I have some ideas to supplement the book with video e-courses that can help people, like if they're stuck and they want to shift to the video mode to like learn. That is an offering I hope to have out in like a few weeks, doing like a few different e-courses based around the book. Also kits, so that all the materials or almost all the materials are right there. You can order them from me and the directions are there and you can make like a one set thing. I feel like that builds confidence for a lot of people who are not expert or like really frequent crafters to have a kit where it's pretty boiled down to simple instructions and you're making this one end result. And it helps them to build confidence that they can like take on the medium in more complicated ways. So yeah, so once the book comes out, I'll have e-courses and kits available. And I think that will be pretty much the milestones for this end of the year. And then next year, I really hope to get back into jewelry making in some new ways with like cast jewelry. And another thing that's been on the back burner was, I guess, wall hangings for me, but I envision doing them in a very different way. So that's on the agenda for next year. And yeah, that's what's on my mind.
I know you said your website. Are you on Instagram? Are you on Twitter? Where are the ways that we can find you, find your work, connect, purchase booklets, and engage?
I am on the gram. You can find me under my name, Lizzie Silva. Again, that's LISESILVA. And really, Instagram is the only social media I really use. But there's that. There's my website. And if you're not on Instagram and you don't use social media, which is very, very understandable, you can sign up for a newsletter. I will be getting that back up and going. I used to put a lot of time and energy into my newsletters, like last year, just, oh my God, I would make these newsletters. You remembered, you got some of them. They would be so extensive. I literally had 3 people in like June one year telling me like, oh my God, I'm still reading your February newsletter. And that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to, like, I need to pare these down. So I'm about to redo my newsletter with a little bit more streamlined. I mean, don't get me wrong, like before my newsletters were long because I would find all these interesting bits of information. It would almost be like a blog where I'd put like all of the stuff.
Yeah, I
But
loved it.
well, thank you. But now I'm like, okay, I need to respect my own time and I'm gonna pare it down and make the newsletter a little bit more quick and accessible to point people in different directions. Like if you want to check this out, you can go here. If you want to check this out, you can go there. So I'm starting the newsletter back up this fall, winter, and people can sign up via my site.
Incredible. I am so excited about all the amazing things you have coming up. I'm excited for the book. And I really, really thank you for taking the time to be on the podcast. And I'm just really excited about all the work that's coming up. It's just incredible to see people you love, people you know, transform and evolve into these amazing artists. And my hat goes off to you. You inspire me.
Thank you, Kendall. You inspire me. And I really appreciate coming, like, this platform is so inspiring and really amazing. And I love listening to podcasts. So I'm honored to be on the Made in Indy podcast.